Great. Good evening, everybody. We're going to be starting here shortly, just letting people enter into the webinar platform. So we'll just give it another minute or so as people join in. Thanks very much. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending our webinar here tonight. We are just thrilled at what the presenters we have lined up for you here tonight and the topic they're covering tonight as well, which we know resonates very much with Canada's early learning and care sector. So my name is Don Giesbrecht. I am the CEO of the Canadian Child Care Federation. And before we begin tonight, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which the Federation is located is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We recognize all Indigenous people who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As Indigenous people have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all. And of course, we know the events of the last few weeks have made this all the more important. Today, these lands continue to be shared territory and are occupied by many diverse peoples from near and far. A treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So again, welcome this evening. Really great turnout as we see people still joining us here now, which is fantastic. We know we've got people from across Canada joining us, so we welcome you on Canada's far east coast in Newfoundland, Labrador, to Canada's far north, all the way out to BC in the west. We appreciate that you take time out of your schedules and lives to join us on an event like this, and appreciate the vast time differences that you are all coming from here as well. A few things before I introduce our speakers and presenters here tonight, and many of you who've joined us before know these things, so you've been through this. Number one, if you're having trouble with your connection, move closer to your Wi-Fi point or to just a stronger signal. That will always help if you're finding the audio or the video is breaking up. All right, number one. Number two, we will be issuing attendance certificates for everybody who attended the live webinar. Those will not come out though until probably early to mid next week. I know you all get very anxious about getting those, which I fully appreciate and understand, but please give us some time to get that work done for all of you until next week. This will be available, this webinar will be available via link after the webinar is done. We will generate some communications to all of you, and the presenters have kindly agreed that we can also share their slides. We're going to make a couple of changes with a few things in the slides, so we will share those out to all of you post-webinar as well. Again, just give us some time and bear with us as we get these all wrapped up. Anyways, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our very wonderful speakers that we have here tonight and presenters. I don't think the Canadian Child Care Federation has ever done a webinar where we were privileged to have 3 doctors on the webinar, and as a sector, I'm not sure we've ever had that either. So I fully appreciate the time and energy that they have all put into this. We have Dr. Jennifer Protuger, who is the Endowed Research Chair in Allergy, Asthma, and the Environment, and an Assistant Professor in the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health, University of Manitoba, research scientist at the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba, and an epidemiologist with the clinical trials platform at the George and Fay Yee Center for Healthcare Innovation. We also have with us Dr. Elana Lavine, who is a community allergist practicing in the Toronto area, both at Humber River Hospital and the Vaughan Pediatric Clinic. She is an assistant professor in the Departments of Pediatrics at both the University of Toronto and Queen's University, and she is the current pediatric section advisor for the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. And we have Dr. Julia Upton, who is a clinical immunologist and allergist at the Hospital for Sick Kids, as it's more commonly known, an associate professor at the University of Toronto, and the medical director of the Clinical Research Center. So with that, Jennifer, I pass it over to you and look forward to all the wonderful information and knowledge you're going to share with us tonight.
Great. Thanks very much, Don, and good evening, everyone. Along with my colleagues, it's really a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar titled Food Allergy in Canadian Childcare Centres. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And sincere thanks to the Canadian Childcare Federation for hosting the webinar. So I'm Jennifer Pritcher, and I'm joined this evening by Dr. Elana Lavine and Dr. Julia Upton. But let me begin also with the land acknowledgement. And I know that this evening's audience comes from coast to coast to coast. I'm speaking to you this evening from Winnipeg, Canada, where I work at the University of Manitoba. And in that respect, we have campuses on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And in recent weeks, we, as Canadians, have learned about the horrific discovery of unmarked graves of Indigenous children at residential schools. Before we begin the webinar, I'd respectfully ask you to all take a moment of silence to remember these children. Every child matters. Thank you. This evening, you'll hear topics that the CCCF told us that were important to its members. Food allergy and food allergen labeling, intake of a child with food allergy into a child care center, tips for managing food allergy, and understanding the need for programs and policies for children with food allergy. And then we'll end with a discussion before touching on the next steps and wrapping up. So we have a series of polls for you this evening. Our first question for you is, have you ever had a child with food allergy in your care? And if I can have the poll set up for that, please.
You know what, my apologies to all of you. I didn't set that up.
Okay.
So, but what people can do is respond in the chat.
Terrific,
people
thank
can
you.
Respond in the chat. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. So our first question for the audience is have you ever had a child with food allergy in your care? If you can type in the chat, no, yes, or unsure, I don't know. See some answers coming in. All right. I see some, a lot of yeses and a few yes, absolutely. So let's then talk about food allergy in schools. So data from 2006 tell us that about 88% of schools, that's almost 9 out of every 10 schools, had one or more students with food allergy. And amongst children with food allergy, about 16 to 18%, almost 1 in 5, have had a reaction from accidentally eating food allergens while at school. And food allergic reactions are potentially life-threatening. Amongst children who have had a severe or potentially life-threatening reaction, also termed anaphylaxis, at school, 25%, that's 1 in 4 children, had no previous diagnosis of food allergy. So our second question this evening, and you're welcome to enter these into the chat or raise these points in the discussion, if you will, if you'd like to at the end, is, where or how did you learn the most knowledge surrounding food allergy? So if you've learned about food allergy from a variety of sources, we'd like to hear about that as well. But also tell us where you learned the most information. Was that at a childcare center from a staff or from administration? Was it at the childcare center, but from a visiting expert? Was it through online education? Or did you attend an in-person training session elsewhere, back when we could attend things in person? Was it from a parent of a child with food allergy, or you don't recall or don't remember? So some answers are starting to come in now, and that's it's an interesting discussion point to think about where individuals are getting food allergy related knowledge, particularly in light of the fact that there's so much information that's available through social media. Our goal tonight is to really address some of these concerns, these questions, and to provide some clarity on how to manage food allergy in schools. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass the virtual floor to Dr. Upton, who will speak about an introduction to food allergy and food allergen labeling.
Great, thank you so much. So I just wanted to start with this picture, which helps us to think about there's lots of different things that can happen when we eat foods. So we call those adverse reactions to foods. And some examples might be that, if you're lactose intolerant, if you drink milk, you might get gassy or have diarrhea. Or if you drink too much caffeine, you might get a racing heart rate. So these are definitely things that have happened. They're definitely things that have happened because you ate that food or drank that drink. But they're a different type of reaction than what we're focusing on tonight. So we're focusing on the immune-mediated food reactions. And that's where the immune system recognizes the food and is making a reaction towards it. So food allergy that we're talking about is an adverse health effect, but it's from a specific immune response, and it occurs reproducibly when exposed to the food. So these are the types of symptoms that you might be used to seeing when you think about a food allergy. And so in the first picture, the person is having hives or lip swelling. They might be itchy and flushed. They can have tongue swelling. So those are the skin symptoms that you can have from this type of allergy. You can have breathing problems. We have shortness of breath, wheezing, cough, stridor, which is where it makes a noise as you breathe in, low oxygen. You can have a change in blood pressure where the blood pressure goes down low and makes people feel weak, collapse, and lose control sometimes of their bodily functions. Or you can have gastrointestinal symptoms, such as having severe crampy abdominal pain, vomiting. So that's the type of allergy that we're focusing on tonight when it's immune-mediated. So this picture is a lot friendlier than the previous one in the sense of being able to just quickly and simply recognize the features of a severe allergic reaction. So this is the Think Fast you can find on the Allergy Aware website. And so here we think about it: face, hives, itching, redness, swelling, or airway with trouble breathing, stomach pain, vomiting, diarrhea, the whole body being itching, swelling, and then weakness, dizziness. Some people describe an impending sense of doom. They say, oh, something bad's going to happen, and that's a sign that something's going on in the body. And then what you need to do about that, which is to give epinephrine. And that's, EpiPen is one brand of epinephrine autoinjector. But at the first sign of an allergic reaction, the intramuscular injection of epinephrine can reverse these features. And then calling emergency management and emergency medical services to continue the medical treatment of the allergic reaction. So the treatment of that type of adverse food reaction, anaphylaxis, is to use epinephrine. And we just want to touch base about that antihistamines, and diphenhydramine in particular is Benadryl. Diphenhydramine is not a good option. The antihistamines don't work fast enough. They don't work long enough. They make children very sleepy and can make it confusing what kind of reaction they're having. It can hide those features of the skin itching, redness, hives, and so we may under-recognize how severe the reaction is. So with that very brief, admittedly, introduction to the type of food allergy we're talking about and the treatment, I just wanted to talk about the priority and non-priority allergens in Canada, including their prevalence and how allergens are identified on food labels. So these are the common food allergies in Canada, and actually these account for more than 90% of all food allergies are due to these foods: milk, egg, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and there's a similar version of wheat called triticale, mustard, fish, crustaceans, shellfish, soy, and sesame. And that's straight from the Health Canada website. Just because that's 90% of food allergies doesn't mean that that's all of them. And so you can be allergic to other foods, which we'll touch base about. But a few quick facts about food allergy, and this is from the Food Allergy Canada website, which is really an excellent resource for learning about food allergy. So food allergy is a public health issue in Canada. There's no cure for food allergy, and avoiding the allergenic food is required to prevent a reaction. There's more than 3 million Canadians have at least one food allergy, and more than 500,000 Canadian children under 18 have food allergies. Peanut allergy in Canada affects about 2 in 100 kids, and 1 in 2 Canadian households are impacted by food allergy. And by that we mean because you either have someone in the family with a food allergy, you have to help care for someone with a food allergy, or you interact with them in your work life, social life. And so some people would estimate it's even higher. So just back to the foods. So in Canada, we have to have one precautionary statement. And so for those foods that we mentioned, the peanut, tree nuts, fish, soy, milk, the priority allergens, the labels have to say may contain, and then the list of what's in it if it could potentially contain that. So you can't have a bunch of separate statements. So it should say may contain X, where X is the name by the food of the food that's commonly known. So if it's peanut, it should say peanut. It shouldn't say, a rack oil, something in Latin. It needs to say peanut. If it's milk, it should say milk. It shouldn't say casein. It shouldn't say any of these things. So for those priority allergens, the labeling is relatively good. It says it as an ingredient, and if it may contain it, then it has it in this one unified may contain statement. And so these are the labeling regulations from 2012. And so again, the law requires the prepackaged foods to list all priority allergens, including ones that are in component ingredients, such as spices or seasonings. So if there's a spice or a seasoning that has milk powder in it, for example, that still needs to be declared. And Health Canada has a specific page on their website dedicated to informing the Canadian public about possible cross-contaminations in food that may not be labeled. And so you can, sign up for those alerts and you receive those notifications as the mistakes are identified. And again, so this is prior, the plain labeling is there. And if a manufacturer fails to declare the presence of priority allergens and gluten sources on prepackaged foods, then they can be in violation of the Food and Drugs Act and the Safe Foods for Canadian Act. And then the product would be subject to enforcement measures, which includes a recall, like they often list on Health Canada. So what about the other foods, though, the non-priority foods? So although 90% of food allergies are to those foods, there, of course, is 10% that are not, and those can be really almost anything else. And so that can be more challenging. So the prepackaged foods carry a label of the ingredients in the decreasing order of proportion. So, if it's macaroni and cheese, not cheese and macaroni, is one of the jokes that we have. But, it should be in the decreasing order of proportion. And that's why often water is the first ingredient in so many foods. And then as of 2016, some ingredients used in food products which were previously exempt from declaration in the list of ingredients, such as components of other foods, non-priority foods, or so margarine, seasoning, flour, are now required to appear on food labels. So here's an example of component food labeling. And so, again, when we say component, we mean an ingredient within an ingredient. So, if an ingredient says, for example, margarine, then what's in that? Or in this example, crust, then what's in that? And so within that, you would have to highlight and list these priority allergens. So this is an example of crust, and it would contain wheat flour, water, sugar, cornmeal, and so on. And so the non-priority food allergens aren't necessarily called out on the label, but the ingredients are supposed to be there. And then if a priority allergen is within a component, then it's called out. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thanks very much. Great. Terrific, thank you. And I'm really happy now to share with you some tips and tricks about intaking a child with food allergy into a child care center. And as this audience well knows, starting childcare is a tremendous milestone for many families, and it causes a lot of mixed emotions, whether the child has food allergy or not. But when you're meeting a child and their family for the first time, when the child has food allergy, take your time. The strategy here is to dedicate time to meeting the child, to make sure that there's enough time to discuss any allergies, to get to know the family a little bit. And often it may be helpful, if it's possible, to book a double appointment to focus on the child and understand some of the family dynamics. So some tips or things you may want to consider is to understand how the family feels about having their child start at a new child care center, or maybe it's the first time that they're ever trusting their child to somebody else other than the home, the household. Also talk with the family about how they think about food allergy, how they're managing it, how they envision it's managed in the child care center. If you feel it's appropriate and you're comfortable asking, it's also would be encouraged to talk if parents are on the same page about food allergy management. And then also how parents talk about risk, both specific to food, but also more broadly, because there may be some interaction between risk-taking behaviors related to food allergy compared to risk-taking behaviors outside of food allergy. But really here, clear communication is the key. And I'd strongly encourage regular communication between the child care center and the family, as this can help promote trust. And I'll come back to this theme a couple of times in the next few minutes. But regular communication also serves the purpose of ensuring that both phone numbers and emails are kept current. It's then wise also to ask the parents about the child's food allergy or allergies. Ask them to list all of them. So ask them to articulate or say that my child is allergic to milk and to egg, or whatever the case may be. And it's also helpful to know about seasonal allergies and what types of symptoms the child may have as a result of seasonal allergies. And the same would go for if a child has asthma, particularly as children with both asthma and food allergy may have more severe reactions to food. I'd also encourage asking the families for detailed information about the child's medicine, including epinephrine, which was touched on a few moments ago, as well as asthma medications. We record those expiry dates and show the family where medication is stored, and ask them to explain how much of medicine is needed and when it's needed. And then once you've heard it, relay that information and repeat that message back to them to demonstrate understanding, but also to correct any possible mistakes. And although the severity of one reaction does not predict the severity of another reaction, it would be wise to consider asking if the child has had any previous reactions. As well, food allergy is one type of medical dietary restriction, but ask if there are any other medical dietary restrictions that the family and the child also manage. Once you have the child in your care and you spend more time to get to know the child, really take time to learn about the child's behaviors, both during and outside of meal times. Is this a playful child, or are they anxious? Are they attention seeking? Are they risk takers? Understanding a child's behavior may also help understand how the child may or perhaps may not react or behave during meal times or times when foods are served. Older children may also be more aware of their food allergy, so try to determine if and what they understand about their knowledge about food allergy. And as children mature, it's important to know, of course, that these behaviors are likely to change. Behaviors may also change, however, if a child is experiencing any stress during meal times or due to other events related to food allergy, such as bullying, or events unrelated to food allergy. So along the lines of communication, I want to come back though and stress here that ongoing communication is key with the family, but it's equally important amongst the staff at the child care center. So all staff should know who has food allergy, what medications or medicines a child has, and where that medicine is stored, as well as the emergency action plan, where it's kept. Both where these items are kept, but also when and how to use them. Seconds matter during anaphylaxis, so it's really critical here to make sure that the medicines are always accessible. If a child doesn't carry their epinephrine autoinjector with them, find a suitable place, such as an unlocked cabinet with a really high shelf, or in a first aid kit that's appropriately sealed but it's on the wall out of reach of small hands, where it is always stored, unless heading out for a field trip. So if the epinephrine autoinjector doesn't need to be used, make sure it's always in that same place. The exception, of course, is if you're heading out on a field trip. So during field trips, it's encouraged that 2 staff members would be responsible for making sure epinephrine autoinjectors are packed. And remember also that epinephrine needs to be kept out of the sun and away out of hot temperatures. So during those long summer field trips, if we are ever able to get back to those, thinking about how an epinephrine autoinjector could be best stored if it's going to be a really hot, sunny day. And while families should also be encouraged to keep track of medicine expiry dates, it's helpful to record these dates as well and send a reminder email to families about 2 months before the epinephrine autoinjector is set to expire. And I would say that it's really unlikely that parents will mind this gentle reminder, and it serves further to build trust with the family. As children get older, some children may develop tolerance or outgrow their food allergies. And in some cases, some children may develop new allergies. So it's important to maintain that ongoing communication with families to see if that is a situation with a particular child. Likewise, it would be also good practice to ask the child or have the parents report if that child has a cough or a cold, to be mindful of those symptoms as well. Really, the key here is keeping those lines of communication open. Communicate with parents whenever questions arise, or if you are curious about finding an alternative food or activity, again, that goes speaking to that need to build trust. And finally, on this note, I would say that, if you're calling a family for any reason, start by introducing yourself, of course, and then if the child is fine, say so clearly and immediately. A phone call from a child care center, especially around meal times, may cause parents to be anxious, and may especially cause parents to be anxious if their child has a food allergy. And final comments regarding this need for ongoing communication relate to special events. So special events such as birthday parties or other celebrations, as well as crafts and baking, are really exciting for small kids. And this includes children with food allergy. But these events may take just a bit more planning when a child in your care has a food allergy. Talk to the parents in advance and discuss what types of foods will be served, how it will be prepared, if the parent would prefer certain products over another, as well as risks of cross-contact or unclear food labels. It may also be worth considering, is there a non-food alternative to having a birthday party that doesn't involve cake, but it would involve a small treat or a small non-food treat. But on that note, it's also important to remember that certain craft supplies also contain allergens. So birdseed, for example, may contain sunflower or sesame seeds. Those tend to be fairly visible, but are still easy for small hands to sort of grab quickly and put in their mouths. While other items such as Play-Doh, of course, contain wheat. And sensory play items such as pasta need to be reconsidered if a child has wheat or egg allergy. And finally, some products that may seem safe may also contain allergens like milk, where you don't necessarily expect it to be present. And this would include things like some brands of glue, children's glue, or soap. And again, as I mentioned, if you feel it's appropriate, you may wish to ask parents to provide allergy-friendly alternatives, and at minimum, reach out to families to help them make an informed decision. I'll now pass the floor over to Dr. Lavine, who will provide some tips on managing allergies in childcare settings during meal times.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. Thanks, Jennifer and Julia. Okay, so I'm just going to speak basically in terms of what's actually going on in the classroom, the meal room, where your kids are sitting and eating meals together, and around the food culture in childcare, because really you guys are providing a lot of feeding opportunities and a lot of exposure to food for very young children, and it's a huge part of the educational process and developmental process in daycare. So our next poll question, which is, how confident are you managing food allergies? So managing children in your center that have food allergies that are coming to your childcare centers. So if you could just indicate if you're not confident at all, if you're a little bit confident, or very confident. I'll just let those answers. And it's fair to say that this is really a changing paradigm because, let's say 30 years ago, this would not have been such a critical part of providing childcare for a group of otherwise healthy children who came to play and learn and nap and eat together. And now, as you all know, and I can imagine you would be able to share with us, this is such an embedded part of the service that you're providing to families. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to let those continue to scroll, and I think I'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about sort of behind the scenes, before the meal. I saw that some of the people that are in attendance tonight are actually the ones that prepare foods in their childcare centers. And I know that coast to coast, there's lots of different places. Some daycares would actually have kitchens in-house that are preparing food. And then there's actually a business that's, developed a niche for caterers that specifically provide foods to childcare centers. So whether the food is being prepared in-house or being brought in from one of these caterers, there's training that's offered to people who are preparing foods in terms of how do we safely do that with the utensils and bowls and pots, and even in terms of keeping surfaces clean and food preparation surfaces. And then there are little issues like oil. So if someone has used oil to fry fish, is that oil safe to, let's say, fry French fries? Now, I know in general, childcare centers are not providing huge amounts of deep fried foods for kids, but these are places where sometimes an allergy has to be considered, where it may not be that obvious. And then once the food is prepared, how do we safely get that food out to the kids in ways where the allergen doesn't contaminate the food that has been safely prepared without the allergen? So these are all things that are probably routinely done in many of your centers, but it really is a bit of a symphony in motion to sort of have all of the pieces in preparation and get them ready. And then in terms of setting up the room, so some of the tips that people will recommend, and I'm sure you guys are doing many of these things, are that a child with food allergy should have some sort of a protected surface to eat on, like a personal placemat, or it might just be that they are always placed next to a staff. It could be that if it's a toddler room or an infant room, then they're actually in high chairs, or the equivalent of that they have their own tray for the meal. And then, of course, the staff who are there for the duration of the meal to kind of supervise what's going on. Because when kids are eating, we all know that they not only eat their food, they wear it. And, it turns into projectiles, it turns into face paint, it turns into natural body art. And that's what they're supposed to be doing, right? But how do we do that in a safe way so that the child who has a food allergy is not necessarily placed at risk by those normal activities? Now, you might have heard recently that there was a guideline document that was published, and we decided to raise this because you might have seen it mentioned in the media that talked about one of many different ideas, actually, in terms of how food allergies should be managed. But one suggestion was that perhaps trying to eliminate every allergen that arises from school might be a difficult target to meet as more new allergens emerge. So it might seem fairly widespread at this point that peanuts and tree nuts should not be brought to schools, but should that extend, let's say, to fish or sesame or eggs or dairy products, depending on the situation in a school or even in a given class? What I want to mention is that that paper highlighted childcare centers as a very special circumstance in that children are very young and some of them may have special needs and or simply be developmentally immature such that they need to be supervised for an activity like eating. And it might be perfectly reasonable to continue having restrictions on foods in daycare in order to protect children with allergies. So for example, if there were a few kids in a childcare center who were allergic to milk, it might seem like a reasonable idea to actually give them a table that was kept free of milk and dairy products. And so even that paper that was trying to be, I guess, forward thinking, acknowledged that childcare centers are fundamentally different than schools. Now, back to before the meal. All staff that are in the childcare center should really know the allergies of anybody who is eating at that time. And I want to highlight the fact that if you have a temporary staff or a substitute staff, I would make an especial effort to make sure that that person is briefed about allergies. It might seem logical that other staff will mention to them not to give a certain food to a certain child, but in my experience, I have actually seen a few lapses in this regard where a very well-intentioned temporary staff has been the one to accidentally give the allergen to a child. And of course, it's not intended. And of course, the reaction that happens makes everyone very unsettled. So it's a very specific thing that I ask the childcare centers that take care of my patients to do, just kind of like a pre-meal briefing. All right, we have a child here who's allergic to milk and another child who's allergic to egg. And here are the foods on the menu, and here are the substitutions or the modifications that have been made for those children. Now, last minute changes to the menu are also somewhat of a trouble area in my experience. And in general, what I tell people that I meet from the childcare sector is if you're not sure, don't give it. There's always an alternative. There's always the option of fresh fruit or fresh vegetable or something that you know is safe. And last minute sort of treats provided by parents for birthdays is sometimes also a bit of a contentious issue. I know that as the years have gone, the childcare centers have become more watchful about things that are brought in from outside. It's always good just to have a stash of snacks that the child with a food allergy can eat without any concern. So there's prepackaged brownies or squares or cookies just to have something safe and easy. And you know, sugar is sugar, so the loss is not particularly acute for them. And if not sure, don't give it. Now, the other thing is before the meal, everyone washes their hands. And I think this seems like a very common practice in childcare centers, probably mostly for infection control, because their hands have been everywhere and anywhere while they're playing, as they're supposed to be. And when they sit down to eat, we want clean hands. And during the meal, we talked about how you could use strategies like a special table, or you could just try to have some physical separation between the child with the allergy and the other children. Of course, we want them to be able to talk and socialize, but you may leave an empty space. You may have a staff in that space. And I would consider labeling cups just because it's not an uncommon thing, as you all know, likely, that a child will reach for the closest cup to drink. And sometimes it's not theirs, you know? And so we want to try to avoid any unplanned sharing of drinks because, as you can imagine, a mouth that has eaten the allergen and then drank from that cup may actually have left some of the allergen on the surface of the cup, such that the child who's allergic who drinks from it may have an allergic reaction from sharing the cup. You know, hands to ourselves while we eat, which is actually a good rule for life in my experience. And then I want to highlight that at the end of the meal, it is a great practice to have everyone wash hands again. And the reason for doing that would be different. It would be because kids wear their food, and somewhere there is a shocking statistic about how often children under 3 touch their faces. I believe it is somewhere in the magnitude of hundreds of times per hour, and they literally always have fingers, eyes, nose, and mouth. And as I'll go on to, it's very easy to transfer food to your face or to your beloved friends. And the hand sanitizer that is now in great abundance during our pandemic era and hopefully our post-pandemic era, it doesn't take food off the skin. It kills viruses, but it does not actually remove food, it just coats it. So it's not a substitute for washing. If you're in a pinch, you can use wipes instead of soap and water. With some agitation, wipes actually do a pretty good job of cleaning food from the skin. All right, I want to talk about smells because this is something that I speak with patients and families on a regular basis. The smells of foods do not cause allergic reactions, period. Okay, and I'll go through some exceptions, but all of you may know someone who claims that a smell of a food will make them have an allergic reaction. What we think is that when a food is cooked, the sorts of proteins that can sort of emanate from the food are not the ones that will cause allergic reactions. So let's say all the children in the room are eating eggs and the room smells of eggs. That in itself does not pose a risk to a child with egg allergy. It may make them uncomfortable or apprehensive if they are old enough to realize that that smell carries risk for them, and similarly for fish. But the smell itself does not cause allergic reactions. And I'll just mention this. I know that essentially now common practice is for childcare centers to be peanut-free, but the very distinctive smell of peanut does not cause allergic reactions, and that's been scientifically studied. And I talked about how putting food on your face is a way of causing an allergic reaction. The rest of your skin is actually a pretty good barrier. And in fact, if a little bit of something gets on intact body skin, it is very unusual for that to cause a severe reaction. The one exception I wanted to mention is that during cooking, sometimes proteins may go into the air, and the classic example of that is fish. So if a child is actually in a kitchen when fish is being cooked or fried, that actually may cause a reaction. Okay, and now I'm going to pass this back on to Julia.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to quickly go back to my, if the system will let me, I just wanted to go back to my labeling slide, just to touch base on, and then don't worry, then we'll go back. Try not to get dizzy. Excellent. Okay, so now that we're sort of warmed up and thinking about keeping kids safe in the childcare environment, I think I just wanted to explain this a little bit more carefully. Sorry, it's late here. So we talked about these being the priority food allergens, and then that there's these new rules about also needing to call out these priority food allergens when they are a component of other foods. So again, components are the ingredients within an ingredient. And so if there's a priority allergen within a component, and so this is a great example here, the part skim mozzarella cheese halfway down, then they have to call out that there's milk in that, even though there's other ingredients. But I neglected to make the point of what isn't called out. So the concern is that if a non-priority allergen is a component ingredient, so for example, you may be hearing about other food allergens such as pea protein or other foods, that pea protein would not need to be called out as a component or an ingredient within an ingredient. It would be listed as a regular ingredient, but not a component ingredient. And so, the bottom line is that there's room to move on the labeling. There's room for improvement on the labeling. And, the actual ingredients are there. The priority ingredients are there, or priority allergens are there. But there are still things that can be missed. And so when in doubt, really it's the food manufacturer themselves that need to tell the family or the concerned person what's in the actual product. Okay, now we're going to zoom back. It's not too far, I don't think. Thank you for that. Great. Okay, so another poll. Is there a Canada-wide policy for food allergy management and training in childcare centers? And no, yes, or I don't know, or I'm unsure. And while you guys are thinking about that, so exactly, no, I see coming through. So in Canada, most things are provincial. And so in 2006, we had Sabrina's Law, which it was in Ontario. In 2010, in Manitoba, the Landmark Childcare Safety Charter, and in 2020, Alberta's Bill 201. So I'll start with Sabrina's Law. So Sabrina's Law from January of 2006 was really a landmark law where it required that every school board in Ontario establish and maintain an anaphylaxis policy to help students with serious allergies. And you can read more about Sabrina and how this law was inspired at Food Allergy Canada. So Sabrina's Law requires that every school board establish and maintain an anaphylaxis policy to help students with serious allergies, and that schools create individual plans for each student at risk of anaphylaxis. And as a result of Sabrina's Law, hundreds of thousands of individualized plans and educational programs have been created in schools across North America and around the world. It's really key because it was the first legislation of its kind in the world and has served as a model for legislation in other provinces and territories, as well as in the United States. So I think that's something to be quite proud of as a Canadian. There's some key other provincial laws. So in 2010, Manitoba passed the Child Care Safety Charter, which was the first legislation of its kind in Canada, mandating safety plans and codes of conduct in childcare facilities. And just recently, Alberta, with Bill 201, the Protection of Children, or the Protection of Students with Life-Threatening Allergies Act. And there, schools should maintain a minimum of 1 epinephrine autoinjector for emergency use. And the schools and the plans should include procedures and instructions for appropriate storage and easy accessibility of the auto-injector, as well as monitoring the expiry and replacement of the emergency epinephrine auto-injector, and procedures for maintaining information in file for every student who has an anaphylactic allergy. So obviously we would never have time to go through all of these laws. The links to them are available. And I think the key is that there is a mandated need to protect the children, although exactly how to do it, does have some leeway. And then with this 2020 bill, seeing that stock epinephrine is now, something that is emerging as a need in school settings and with children. And I'll take it back to Jennifer.
Great. Thanks very much, Julie, for the description of the provincial policies on food allergy. So over the last 15 years, only 3 provinces really have specifically addressed provincial level policies for food allergy management in childcare settings. And this really led us to wonder, what should those next steps be? And so with that in mind, no surprise, there's another question for the audience. And that question reads, please tell us if you think a cross-Canada bilingual, i.e. French and English, virtual course on food allergy management in childcare centers, for which you're awarded a certificate at the end, would that be useful to you? Do you strongly agree that such a program would be useful? Do you agree? Do you remain neutral? Disagree, or strongly disagree? Seeing a few answers start to pop up on the chat. The answers are coming in faster than I can scroll. So this really leads us, as I said, to thinking about what our next steps should be. And so, this is something that a group of us have been thinking about for some time. So I'm just going to maybe plant a seed about this possibility going forward, and hope that we're able to bring you some good news in the not so distant future on that regard. I see a lot of strongly disagrees coming in, so glad to see that. I just want to take another minute or two, being mindful of the time, to provide a few key takeaway messages from the webinar this evening. And so when we speak about food allergy, what we're talking about is an allergy that causes the immune system to react badly to a food or different types of food, but they're all specific foods. And 90% of the allergies in Canada are caused by those priority allergens. But food allergy can occur to so many different foods, and we see more and more emerging on that front. In most schools and child care centers in Canada, there is at least one child with food allergy, and we see that in the literature at large, but also from the information that you provided us with tonight. So thank you for providing your feedback throughout the course of this presentation. We also know from the data that as many as 1 in 5 children with food allergy have had a reaction from accidentally eating food allergens while at school. And although ingredient lists are regulated by law, only certain allergens need to be called out. Again, those priority allergens. If anaphylaxis is suspected, current protocol is use epinephrine and call 911. I want to reinforce, and this can't be overstated, that need for ongoing communication, both within the child care center, particularly when there are substitute staff, have that ongoing communication, but also with the family. Building trust is critical, and maintaining vigilance during snack time and meal times and those special events or craft times. Anytime a child is near food is essential to lower their risk of reaction. And as was just described, not all provinces have policies to support food allergy management in childcare settings. On that note, I want to thank you very much for your interest in food allergy and for your active participation this evening. And again, our thanks to the CCCF for the invitation to speak. And we've got just a couple of minutes before the top of the hour, so happy to take any questions. And while we're going through the discussion, I'll post a slide here with some additional resources that may be of interest. And to kick things off, there was a question that came through on the chat a little while ago, and it reads, with the pandemic, is it safe to bring food in from an outside source? So in terms of food allergy, if a child brings food in and keeps that food to themselves, it's in theory safe. We need to remember how young children are developing. They're very curious, and they should be, and this is a normal developmental process. But keeping small hands out of other individuals, other kids' foods or cutlery, or wanting to taste things and putting their hands in is a real risk. And so thinking about what's developmentally appropriate for that age group is something always to bear in mind, and defaulting back to making sure that a person reads that ingredient list. And really the ideal would be to triple check. So having the person who's preparing the food, purchasing the food, if it's purchased by the child care center, reading that label at the point of purchase, reading that label at the time when food is stored in the pantry or wherever it happens to be, and then again at the time of food preparation. So that triple check to control that the risk is minimized for any potential allergen exposure. I'm just reading a question here that I think might resonate with a lot of people. Why do children develop food allergies? Pretty big question.
I'll give that one a shot. So that's probably the $1 million question. I'm sure everyone would love, to know the exact answer. I will say that the strongest risk factor for developing food allergies that we know of currently is delayed introduction of the food. So meaning that there was advice in the 1990s that seemed to make sense, that infants were too young, too immature, their bodies weren't ready for it. And so the advice was to delay eating nuts and peanuts and those kinds of foods until they were quite a bit older. And then very high level research showed that if you actually feed these types of foods to kids very young, between 4 to 11 months, they have more than 80% reduction in the chances of being allergic versus eating them around 5 years of age. So there's a lot of caveats on that. It needs to be introduced in the diet. It needs to be kept in the diet, but then also it needs to be in a form that's appropriate for a little kid. And so some places that have been really good at getting the word out of eating the foods early have seen that some kids are having choking hazards. So it's really important that the form is conveyed in the message to eat it early and keep it in the diet. So that's the biggest risk factor. When we think of other things that are going on, there's roles of pollution and other factors, but certainly the one that's under our greatest control is to get food in the diet, get it in early, and keep it in.
Great, thanks. One more here. I know we're at the top of the hour, but if you don't mind, one more question here. Regarding labels, does a company have to indicate if their suppliers have products that contain an allergen?
Julia, do you want to speak to that? I'm trying to think. I guess that question might pertain to, for example, if a flour that's in a cookie might have on the flour a label for it may contain, I don't know, mustard or something like that. In terms of components, I think that has to be transparent at some level, but I'm not 100% sure how the laws account for that.
You're on mute, Julia.
Thank you. One thing I may not have made clear is that all of the labeling discussions was about prepackaged food. And I think your question was about prepackaged food, but I'd love to use this opportunity just to make clear that it isn't about restaurant food. It isn't about bakery food. It isn't about any other settings of food. Settings that are really important to many people, especially if you're buying foods from other scenarios. So it's only prepackaged foods that has these Health Canada labeling laws. And then when we think of those Health Canada labeling laws, I mean, the companies have to declare the ingredients themselves and the component ingredients of those priority allergens. The may contain, I must admit, if we had a buzzer, I think I would phone a friend to Food Allergies. They were instrumental in achieving the 2012 labeling laws and know this backwards and forwards. Certainly, as I understand it, there is some manufacturing discretion in what they have to declare in that way. And those precautionary labelings, like the may contain part, has less sort of strict rules than the contain part, where you must say it contains those foods and you must say it contains those foods as a component. And the may contain is a little bit blurrier as I understand it.
Mm-hmm. If I can just jump in for a second too. So the precautionary allergen labeling or those may contain labels, those are voluntary, but at the same time, things like, nut-free, that nut-free logo that's often on a product, or the vegetarian symbol, those are voluntary. And so they're not regulated per Canadian law. And so always take those with, almost with a grain of salt. I mean, good practice would be that if a person has any concerns, to call up the manufacturer, ask them what's in it. If there are any concerns at all and there's still not clarity, then choose a different option. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, wanting to stress again that triple check. So checking a label at the point of purchase, at the point of storage in the child care center, and then again at the time of meal preparation. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. There's a question I'd love to speak to that's come up in the chat, which is, what role do preservatives play in allergies? Oh, I think Dawn is rejoining.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I just disappeared for a moment.
Dawn, so one of the participants has asked about preservatives, which is a question we get a lot. Do you mind if I speak to that?
No, please, go right ahead.
Okay.
Yes. So
preservatives are a very, very, very rare food allergen. The ones that have been highlighted in the past they usually have the word sulfite in them, so metabisulfite or bisulfite. They are extremely rare as the kind of allergens that would cause the kind of reactions that Julia described to you. So commonly with, hives, redness, itchiness, swelling, tummy ache, vomiting, feeling sleepy, grouchy, those are the kinds of things that your kids might do from food. Metabisulfite or bisulfite don't typically do that. What they've been shown to do is possibly give people kind of a flare-up of their asthma. So true allergy to preservatives is extremely rare. And I'll just take this chance to also mention that it's also very rare to have allergies to food dyes or food colorants. That is somewhat of a legend. We will always look for another reason, and there is no commonality among red foods. So there's this myth of the red food, of a red food dye or things with red coloring causing an allergy. I have never made that diagnosis, and it's one of these things, I don't want you to think that it's something that is important or it's really quite exaggerated, and hopefully an allergist that you speak to, if in the context of yourselves or your clients and their families, will be able to clarify that for them. So we do not worry very much about food dyes or about preservatives.
Great. Excellent. Thanks so much. There was another question in there too, but for whatever reason, my chat has also disappeared. So there's a bit of a gremlin in the machine here, if you will. So, but that's all right. I really want to thank Dr. Prodiger, Dr. Upton, Dr. Lavine for your wisdom, your knowledge, and for the wealth of information. Lots of comments that were coming through in the chat about how appreciative people were. And in fact, I saw a lot about, can we do more on this? So perhaps that's something we can do down the road if you're willing and able. So again, thank you so much to everybody for attending. Just a couple of reminders here for everybody. Yes, we will put out a video link. Yes, we will share the slides and the links that have been shared here. And we will also send, as I said earlier, your certificates of attendance, but all this will come next week. Until then, again, thank you very much to everybody for coming. Thank you to our presenters, and we look forward to the next time. Thank you, and stay safe and stay well.